Welcome, and thank you for joining Zonta International and the International Advocacy Committee for this special webinar on the status of women in the workplace. We hope this will be an interactive session and invite you to join the conversation. We will have dedicated time for questions at the end of today's session. However, please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It is now my pleasure to introduce Zonta International President Sharon Langenbeck. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome again to all of you. It's wonderful to see so many people here with us today. Today's topic is an important one. While women's representation in senior leadership roles and on corporate boards has improved, there is still a long way to go to reach gender parity. At the same time, as women seek out greater leadership opportunities at the top, women at all levels of work face numerous challenges, including unequal pay, burnout, and violence and harassment in the workplace. Sadly, the situation for women in the workplace has only become more difficult as a result of COVID-19. As Zontans, we envision and work toward a world where women have access to all resources and are represented in decision-making positions on an equal basis with men. Thank you to the International Advocacy Committee and our panelists today for bringing attention to this important issue. And thank you for your presence here today and for joining Zonta to learn more so we can all work together to transform the workplace for women. I now turn it over to Bobby Cardia to begin today's conversation.
Thank you, Sharon, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and I hope that you've all come here to be inspired today, because I know you will be as we focus on women in the workplace. To achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality, by 2030, we must address the gender gaps in the workplace. While 47% of women currently work as compared to 72% of men, recent ILO research indicates that 70% of women would like to have paying jobs. But in order to do that, there are a number of obstacles that stand in the way. And as President Sharon said, Zonta International envisions a world in which women take part in decision-making on an equal basis with men. So our first speaker will address her own experience in getting to the top of a corporate board, where we are today and where we go from there. Obviously, we also envision a world in which women have no fear of violence. And so our second speaker will share with us the brand new means of combating that Zontans can endorse and champion. And finally, our third speaker will share with us something that we aspire to, where every woman can reach her full potential. And in the workplace, that means creating a workplace of tomorrow where men and women complement each other and women leaders flourish. So first, we'd like to introduce our first speaker, Margot Hoffman, and share a little about her. Margot Hoffman, PhD, is the president and CEO of the Partnership for Excellence, TPE, the regional Baldrige program for the promotion of performance excellence in Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Margot has more than 25 years experience in engineering, corporate training, general management, and senior leadership positions with global automotive supply corporations. She's been an active Zontan for more than 25 years and been in clubs in Toledo, Ohio, Melbourne, Australia, and Columbus, Ohio, and held various roles at the club and district level, including being our District 5 governor from 2018 to 2020. So Margot, I invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. And thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to share my insights and knowledge of women in senior leadership roles and on corporate boards. If you could go to the next slide, please. I want to share a bit about my path to leadership and getting on a corporate board to show the breadth of experiences that have prepared me for these roles. I started my career in engineering, but as you can see, I've crossed disciplines, I've lived in other countries, and I've overseen profit and loss operations. My experience living in Australia, launching an independent rear suspension module and starting a new plant opened my eyes to the value of diversity. The initial team that I led consisted of women and men from 8 different countries and diverse ethnicities. And boy, could we debate things. We had some pretty heated discussions sometimes, but we always looked at the different perspectives. There was no groupthink. No one came in with preconceived ideas. And so we would debate these decisions, which took time, but it resulted in very sound decisions. So that's my first really great experience with what diversity adds to an organization. That really laid the foundation when I became the president of a $1.5 billion global business unit with an automotive supplier, and was responsible for 33 facilities in 17 countries and 7,000 people. I'm currently, as Bobby shared, the president and CEO of the Partnership for Excellence, but I've also joined a corporate board, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And some of the things that, the skills that Zonta has helped me develop, one of them, believe it or not, when I first started working, it was oftentimes I would have to present to auditoriums full of men, but I rarely presented to women. So it was a little bit intimidating for me to get in front of a Zonta meeting with 40 women in attendance and present to them. So it really expanded my presentation skills, and also the protocol that we learned from leading committees has helped me with being on a corporate board and leading committees there. Next slide. As I was moving up the corporate ladder, one of the questions I often asked myself was this one: do women need different skills than men to be effective in global senior leadership? And so when I started working on my doctorate degree, I decided to focus my dissertation around this. And my dissertation was on the impact of gender on global leadership effectiveness. I wanted to create a model for female leaders. And so in 2013, when I published my dissertation, at that time, 24% of senior management positions globally were held by women. Today, that has grown to 29%. So we have seen growth, but as Sharon mentioned, not enough growth. Also at that time, 15.7% of board seats on Fortune 500 companies were held by women. And today that has grown to 30%. Again, good growth, but not where we need to be. So my research and the qualitative study I conducted actually suggests that females do not need different skills to be effective leaders. So there was, evidence to show that men and women needed to develop the similar skills. However, what we also realized was that women have to overcome greater challenges as they advance up that corporate ladder to those senior leadership roles. Next slide, please. So these are the skills that emerge from my research that contribute to leadership effectiveness in global organization. So this is, I'm not going to go into details about each of these, but it starts with being grounded in a set of core values and principles. And really today, a very important skill that we've all seen in the last couple of years are those adaptation skills and being agile. So these are skills that women can develop and challenge their male counterparts as they rise up the corporate ladder. Next slide, please. But as my research also found, women need to overcome more challenges to rise to those senior management positions. And the chart on the left shows experiences that enhance global leadership effectiveness. And when I was interviewing the group of men and women, I found that the men that I was interviewing had significantly more experience in growing their business globally, in negotiations, in overseeing profit and loss operations, and in expatriate assignments. So these are key experiences that enhance global leadership effectiveness, and yet women oftentimes are not getting the opportunity to have these experiences. The other thing that revealed itself were these challenges that are unique to women. For example, there are still cultures and countries that are not conducive to women being in leadership, which is a challenge if you're in a global organization. There's also oftentimes higher expectations of women as they take on the leadership roles. And there's other obstacles that face women. And one that came up, I didn't ask any questions at all in my research, but all of the women brought up the demands of parenting, and not one of the men brought that up. So that's an additional challenge that's unique to women. So if you could go on to the next slide. So based on the outcomes of my research, I developed this diagram here, the fractured ladder, which conceptualizes the path that female managers navigate to advance into senior leadership. And you can see on the rails of the ladder, those are those skills and behaviors that I showed a bit ago that both men and women need to develop to be effective leaders. And then the rungs are those experiences, profit and loss experience, negotiations, international assignments, general management, restructuring. And you can see some of those rungs are broken because oftentimes, as I shared, women don't get those opportunities to have those experiences. The arrows that the woman is dodging are those challenges that I talked about, the cultural, the parenting, the higher expectations. And then you can see the concrete blocks that are on as shoes for the woman. And those are those higher expectations and those other obstacles that are pulling women down. So when women can develop the skills and behaviors shown in the rails and gain all of those experiences on the rungs of the ladder, the negotiation skills, the profit and loss, the international experience and global growth, they're going to be much more well-positioned to be able to dodge those arrows and move up that ladder. And so I was able to do that. And I was fortunate to get an opportunity to join a corporate board. If we could go to the next slide. And in 2018, I joined the board of a $2 billion global manufacturing company that has 48 facilities in 17 countries. And these were the independent directors on the board at the time who I interviewed with. And they're a great group of guys. They're intelligent, they know the business, and they gave me the opportunity to join the board, which I'm grateful for. But as you can see, they are all white males. There are no females. There's no diversity. The average age was 67 years when I joined the board, and 83% of the board members spent their entire career in the manufacturing sector. And I was the first female on the board. I did have their full support, and I had the full support of the CEO, who's not shown in this picture. When I joined the board, and actually even before I joined the board, during the interviewing process, I immediately expressed the need for the board to diversify. And I knew as soon as I joined the board that was the right thing to do. There was a lot of groupthink. Decisions were made very quickly because they all had very similar perspectives, which meant the committee meetings were very short, and we didn't have a lot of debate. I also immediately recognized that I had become a role model for the female managers in the company. When I would go to the head office for meetings, I would be swarmed by the women there, just wanting to talk to me and get to know me, which is great. So it made me realize that I could help improve their succession planning process. The other board members saw value in bringing women on the board, but I'm not sure they knew the best way to go about it. They would always tell me, there are not many Margots out there. And what they meant was that I had the manufacturing background and the experience and some of the expertise to be on the board. And there just weren't a lot of women that had those experiences to join a board of a manufacturing company. So in 2019, they appointed me to the chair of the Nominating and Governance Committee. And they knew that I was going to make changes to the board. So I opened their minds to bringing different types of experiences and knowledge to the board, such as analysts from Wall Street and chief financial officers from different industries. I convinced them to add another board seat so we could bring more women to the board. We also put a plan together to have some of the current board members depart the board and make sure that we executed that plan. Next slide, please. So fast forward to today, and this is what our board looks like. So in the past 2.5 years, we've increased the board to 43% women. We have some ethnic diversity now, and we've brought in different backgrounds. 57% of the board come from different industries now. We found the right people by leveraging our network to identify candidates. That way we knew we were finding people that fit the culture. And I think it helped to attract women by having a woman as the nominating chair, that the first person that was approaching them was a woman. And in that role, I thought it was important that I be a mentor and supportive of the new members. Today, the board is more engaged. Everyone has an equal voice. We have good debate and we listen to different perspectives. That means our meetings are longer now, but we do have better outcomes from them. Next slide, please. This is an example of a matrix of skills and experiences from a global manufacturing company for its board members. So you can see what they're looking for. Not every person is going to have every one of these skills, but as a board member, you're going to want to have a lot of these skills, and they also want to make sure that the board members complement each other. So this is a great list of skills and experiences that women can gain to prepare themselves for board positions. And I started off my discussion this morning showing you my background to demonstrate how I was able to develop a diverse set of skills by having different experiences. You know, I managed a corporate university. That wasn't something I had ever even considered. I had never considered doing an international assignment when I started in engineering, but these were great skills for me to develop as I moved up the corporate ladder. So you can see the skills I was able to develop by crossing disciplines and doing different types of jobs were things like strategy and financial expertise and those international experiences and compensation that I would not have been able to develop had I just stayed in the engineering function my whole career. Next slide, please. We have made good progress the past few years. We are now at 30% of board seats are represented by women globally. But as you can see, this deviates among countries significantly, where in some countries, boards have 10% of their board represented by women, with the highest being 43%. So we've made great progress, but there's a long ways to go still. Next slide. Thank you for your time. I hope that the information I have presented is valuable and will help women get into senior leadership positions and corporate boards. And I will turn it back over to Bobby.
Thank you so much, Margot. We've learned an awful lot. I know there will be questions for you. But now I'd like to start our second speaker, who is Anita Thomas. Anita is the chair of the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, a substantive committee of the Conference of NGOs, and serves as a convener of the Ngo Coalition to end violence and harassment in the world of work. A coalition convened by 5 NGO committees to advance the ratification of ILO C-190. Her professional experience spanning over 20 years with both domestic and international NGOs includes management roles with the Conference of NGOs, Sam Schmidt Paralysis Foundation, and consultant roles in project management, grants management, and finance. So we welcome you, Anita, and look forward to your remarks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Bobby. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. My deep appreciation to Zonta International and Bobby for inviting me to speak today. My special thanks also goes to Leslie Wright for recommending me as a speaker for the session. Leslie is a friend, mentor, and colleague over the last 20+ years since I started advocating to advance the rights of women and girls at the United Nations in 2000. I came to know of Zonta International and its incredible work to to advance the rights of women and girls when I started representing the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts at the UN. Thanks to Leslie Wright, again, who was leading the Girl Scouts team at that time. And so you see the trajectory, how women come together, women support each other, and you continue on this path of strong advocacy on the rights of women and girls at the United Nations. So I'm proud to have Zonta International also as a member of the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, which I've been chairing since for the last 3 years. So it's a great opportunity for me to be here to speak about the work that we do, the ratification of Ilo Convention 190, and additional information. So next slide, please. So in this presentation, first I'll provide a brief background on the ILO Convention 190, and then I will talk a little bit about the coalition and its work. So the convention on June 21st, 2019, the International Labor Conference adopted the convention concerning the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. A convention number 190. It is also referred to as ILOC 190, ILO Convention 190, and its accompanying recommendation number 206. The convention and the recommendation are the first international standard on violence and harassment in the world of work. The convention number 190 is a binding international treaty creating obligation for governments that ratify the convention. And recommendation 206 provides guidance in implementing it. The beauty of the convention is that it just does not cover corporate employees as formal workers, regardless of the gender, sector, nationality, contractual status, and also interns, apprentices, and persons exercising the authority of an employer. Member states that have ratified have clear obligations and must submit regular reports for review by the ILO Committee of Experts on the application of convention and recommendations. Next slide, please. Status of ratification. From this, you will see that 10 countries have ratified the convention. And, and many countries, almost 50 countries are on the path to ratification, but here you see some countries that are clearly had initiated a concrete process, possibly through a domestic process, some legislation in the parliament. Again, Spain, you would see that will be depositing the instrument with ILO soon. So countries are on different paths. So it is important for an organization such as Zonta to see that, because you have presence globally in 60 plus countries, as I understand from Bobby. The convention itself came into force on June 25th, 2021, 12 months after the ratification by 2 member states. So you will see in this case, it's Uruguay and Fiji, Uruguay being the first country to ratify, followed by Fiji. And then once they register the ratification with the ILO's Director General. You can learn more about the convention, the ratification process, the progress, etc., on the ILO website. And after my presentation, I will share the link in the chat. Next slide, please. Why is it important to ratify ILOC 190? So as a universal standard, ILOC 190 will fill in the gaps. Many countries have existing laws, domestic laws that address violence and harassment in the world of work, but Convention 190 provides a comprehensive set of guidelines for prevention, redress, protection of victims and whistleblowers, and judicial pursuit of perpetrators. Ratification is crucial, as the most impacted are in many cases already marginalized, those in marginalized communities, such as those in the informal sector, migrant workers, domestic workers, who are predominantly women, and the existing national legislations do not extend to cover them. Next slide, please. So, and there are several challenges, as with any international treaty that is going through a process of ratification, there are several challenges, and even after it gets ratified, there are challenges. So you will see that the first challenge I see is that ratification is only just the beginning. There's a whole process of implementation, monitoring, and reporting are the essential ways to impact change. The second one, such reports of rising workplace harassment, even in the virtual setting, it all came to light during COVID, when violence and harassment, even in a virtual setting, was rising. So, which highlights the fact that workplace harassment is not only primarily a result of physical access, but rather a problem of workplace culture and the predominance of patriarchal power relations. And the third challenge I see is the need for clear policies in workplace harassment, regardless of the setting of harassment. So enterprises need to address online harassment, as well as consider the nexus of domestic violence and workplace, as well as its implications, not only for victims, usually a woman, and on her capacity to work and continue to perform, but also on the overall working environment. A recent report by the International Transport Federation titled "Shifting the Focus: Impacts on Workplace" shared that when workers perpetrate domestic violence, their workplaces are at increased risk of accidents, injuries, and fatalities. Workers who behave abusively at home are also more likely to have arguments with their coworkers. Such risks impact workers themselves, their coworkers, customers, and their workplaces. The fourth is an incident report. Now, many private sector companies use third-party services, such as My Safe Working Place, allowing victims to submit an incident report anonymously and confidentially. While some companies take serious action based on the post-investigation report from the service provider, ultimately any further action will depend on the employer's policy. And then in addition, the Human Resource Department reports the CEO of the company and rarely has the power to take independent decisions in the interest of the victim. And the fifth is underreporting. As usual, we saw with the Me Too movement, women gained a lot of strength to come out and really call about violences that have been impacted against them decades back. And so it is very important to be kept in the forefront, and for women to be given, those women who don't have the power to speak, to be given the power to speak. And there comes the role of powerful entities such as Zonta International to be raising this issue, and in the forefront. And so, and then the last one is underreporting of violence and harassment due to fear. I already mentioned that. And the last one is inadequacy of reliable data. So reliable data, gender disaggregated data is a major issue across all spectrum, on all the issues that we advocate at the UN, on whether it's financing for development, whether it's social development, whether it's status of women, data is crucial. And in this regard too, it is very important to have disaggregated data, based on gender, ethnicity, ability, extra, and all the details are provided here in order to make sure that, once the convention is ratified, we can track that it's being implemented and it's being reported correctly. Next slide, please. Here, this slide gives you an overview of the Ngo Coalition itself. The Ngo Coalition was created in 2019. As at the initiative of the NGO Committee on Financing for Development. It came about because we had held a meeting, NGO Committee on FFD had held a meeting with ILO, where ILO was present. They approached asking if NGO, we would come together to support, to advance ratification of ILO Convention 190. They started a small conversation, and we reached out to our fellow NGO committees and the NGO committees that we work very closely with. And there seemed to be very strong interest because violence and harassment in the world of work impacts every single issue that we work on, whether it's financing for development, whether it's status of women, social development, migration, it is there. And so we felt this was a common ground that we could come together and really, use that momentum to work on. So since 2019, we've been working together. And I also want to recognize, I'm not sure he's in the room, Matthew Cognac from the ILO office in New York, who has been pivotal for us in this regard. He has been our liaison to the ILO office in New York, and without a champion, a supporter, to get this work done, it's not possible. So a lot of the work that we have been able to do as a coalition has been on account of the support that we receive on the other end. And most of the coalition's work has been focused on direct advocacy with UN member states. We meet with them, we speak to them, and we bring the concerns to them and really talk about on what path they are with regard to the ratification process. So this has been very good because we are based in New York, we advocate in New York. And the second, and next slide, please. So this slide gives you, it's got a lot of information. It gives you an overview of the work that the coalition has been doing. And I don't know whether, Megan, if you're able to just click on that first link to advocacy letter. That is where we started. And that gives you the depth of the number of organizations that have come together to endorse, to call for ratification. There are 1,155 NGOs that have ratified the convention, that endorse this letter. And in this, Zonta International is one of the endorsers. of this letter, we have 16 Zonta US-based clubs who are part of this, and I'm hoping that this will be picked up, by all Zonta clubs so they can advocate within your respective countries. I will post all the links, and this PowerPoint will be shared with you so you can see, the trajectory of our work. And next slide, please. So why should Zonta be engaged? Ratification of ILO C-190 will play a crucial role in establishing the enabling legal environment. As women continue to earn less than men for the same work and face higher risk of violence and harassment in their workplace, if governments are serious about gender equity, they must also take important steps towards creating legal environment that safeguards women's rights and incentivizes their work, thereby advancing economic growth and social well-being. And there's a cost to not doing this, because sexual harassment costs $2.6 billion in lost productivity and $0.9 billion in other financial costs. Next slide, please. Next. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes, and so I have a few recommendations for action. This came out of the consultation. We held a very large consultation in September 8th. On September 8th, we had trade union representatives, ILO staff people, UN organizations, coalition members came together to really consult on what are some of the challenges, what are some of the recommendations. You can see this in the slide that I showed previously. It provides the report from it, the recommendations from it, so you can use it for your own purpose. And we, as usual, it's always important to have a social media campaign using hashtag Ratify C-190. And the second one is raising awareness, for delivering on their national, international commitments, as well as to monitor and remind concerned entities of their obligations. We would also say that since you are an endorser of this, the letter that we submitted to member states, it'll be great if you can post it onto the Zonta International website so that more people can see, more people who are connected to Zonta can learn about the coalition and really pique an interest to strengthen advocacy on the ground to advance ratification. And we also call for, as I already mentioned, disaggregated data is very important. And then the fourth one is pay special attention to visibility and ensuring protection within the provisions of convention to less visible groups and informal workers, domestic, migrant, and home-based workers. And then the fifth one is informing government representatives, employers, and trade union representatives and civil society as part of a comprehensive approach to implementing the convention. And the sixth one is identifying a champion. Now, this is something that we never thought of when we started discussing. It's always good to have a champion in the government entity, that it doesn't matter where you are, which entity it is, if it's a finance ministry, it's a gender ministry, but it's always good to have a champion at the country level so you can move your advocacy forward in that particular advocacy initiatives forward. So it is important to identify a champion for yourself. And then the seventh one is coalition building. It's sort of obvious that we have to come together, work across aisles. Otherwise, it is not going to be possible, because this violence and harassment in the workplace impacts everybody, as I said, regardless of your gender, status, nationality. So we also have to come together. And who else can do this other than organizations such as Zonta, which has got people across all over the world, and you have people from all nationalities. So something great to come together to mobilize people to advocate on. So while victims of violence of harassment in the world of work are predominantly women, the issue is not specific to women. It impacts everyone. Therefore, strategy and advocacy efforts to address the scourge of an advanced ratification of ILO C-190 must be multi-pronged, multi-stakeholder approach. Therefore, we need to work outside of silos and collaborate across silos, build coalitions, and bring on board as many advocates as possible to advance ratification. So with that, I would like to end my word there. Thank you so much, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Anita, for sharing that very concrete way that Zonta can take on a new advocacy effort. And as you know, Zonta has supported CEDAW over the years, and we've been very strong in our support of that. And this is a new opportunity for us. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I'd now like to turn to our next presenter, Carmen Pinky Valdez. Pinky Valdez, PhD, is the president of AWARE, the Alliance of Women for Reform. And she's the president of Sacred Springs, the environmental arm of Loyola College, Loyola School of Theology. She was formerly the president of Assumption College, San Lorenzo in the Philippines. She has an extensive background in spirituality, education, corporate, executive, and family counseling, and facilitation of transformational leadership training programs. She was a longtime professor before becoming dean of the Assumption College Marie Eugenie School of Innovative Learning. Her book, Educating Women Leaders, Transformation of Women's Colleges, was published in 2017. And Pinky, we welcome you and look forward to hearing all about what you're doing and what you recommend for us.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much to Zonta for inviting me. And number two, I'd like to congratulate the two panelists who spoke before me. They have contributed a great deal to the discourse of what we're trying to push forward through the advocacy of Zonta. So I congratulate them in advance. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack. It's going to be more self-reflective. And I just put a woman in charge. I think you've heard the song. I think it's named by Kibo. He's a singer. It's a beautiful song. Look it up on wherever you get your music. But his song, Put a Woman in Charge, is very powerful. Anyway, what I want to say today is it is time for the feminine spirit to be the energy of the world. When I say feminine spirit, it doesn't mean only women. If you look at, for Catholics, if you look at Pope Francis, he has a feminine spirit. He didn't start out this way. He was very, very strict when he was younger, but now he has taken on a full feminine spirit, and you'll see why. And it is time for the feminine spirit to come forward. So what I want to say is that what the female has to do naturally is just be a woman, because the feminine spirit is what we desperately need right now. May I have the first slide, please? The next slide, please. Thank you. So let me start. I'm going to center it around three areas. The first is a circle of consensus. Maria Ressa just got the Nobel Prize together with a Russian because she's the editor and founder of Rappler. Now, what did she do? She was working for CNN, by the way, and she's a Filipina. She came back to the Philippines and she said, I'm going to start my own. Actually, it's all network, it's all online. And it's very risk-oriented. But what she does beautifully, and I went to see her and I interviewed her, et cetera, et cetera. And when I went to her office, all the desks they're all sitting side by side. They're continuously talking, everybody at their desk with their laptops, obviously. And then they have rooms all around and they're all covered with glass. And when you go inside, everybody writes on the glass. So you can still see people from the outside, but you're looking at the glass and you're looking at each other. What she has created is a circle of consensus. She gets people together, they discuss it, whatever it's going to be, whatever they're going to put on Rappler the next day. And now it's about the only thing that's left that's really, really strong in the Philippines in terms of network television news, which is risk-oriented. It's under her. And of course, she is in jail because our president will not accept anyone coming forward with the truth. So she has been arrested 4 or 5 times and she's presently in jail. She was allowed to go and get her Nobel Peace Prize, but she's back in jail again. And then, of course, she's out on bail again for the 3rd time. Now, what is she strong at? Risk orientation. She gets people together and they say, okay, we're going to discuss this, but when we make a decision, everybody has to back it up, even if it wasn't your idea. And that's what consensus is. That's number one. Number two, I will be the front runner. I will be the face of the company. So if anyone's going to be arrested, it will be me. And that's exactly what happened. She is the one arrested. She backs them up when they come up against the government, but she takes the rap and she's the one who goes to jail. I personally, when I suddenly about 10 years ago, I decided to come forward and tell the story of my childhood, and it comes out in my book. Because I am a victim of sexual abuse, both by a cousin at the age of 7 and by a LaSalle brother when I was 8. And in between the two things, I was physically abused by an aunt. to make the long story short, she decided, because I was wetting the bed because I was being abused, she decided she was going to get matches and burn you know where. So she burnt me. So from that experience, I said, if I'm going to step forward and do anything for women, and if I'm going to step forward and do anything that is truthful, I have to take a huge risk and come out. And I was president of Assumption at the same time. So it came out in the newspaper in big red letters, you know, the president of Assumption was sexually, actually they use the word rape, was raped, you know, because it looks really good it really looks really good on the front page. And so, but you have to take a risk. So part of the feminine spirit is we always take a risk. We have a monthly period, and whether or not you ever give birth, it doesn't matter. Every single month you're told you have to give birth to life. You have to give birth to something new, something beautiful and creative. That is how the feminine body is made. So it's in our genes. And if you can see for yourself here, I don't need to say anything about the photographs. She's a fabulous human being and she's forever smiling. Can I have the next slide, please? So, circle of consensus. Number 2, circle of compassion. And this comes naturally to women. You know why? Our bodies are even built that way. They're soft. I mean, when a woman holds a baby, it's so beautiful. When a man holds a baby, he looks kind of awkward because he's all muscle everywhere. But the baby sits very gently on the mother's chest. Why? Because it's soft. That's who we are. This is our softness is not our weakness. Our softness is our strength, because that's where vulnerability comes from. And you cannot have any kind of anything creative unless you are vulnerable. So Jacinda Ardern, whom I think is a fabulous, fabulous Prime Minister of New Zealand, look at the way she's hugging this Muslim woman. The Muslims were attacked, as you know, in New Zealand, I think 2 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago. And what she did, she went there, she put on a veil because it's not proper for women to go without a veil. And she went and looked at the way she's hugging the woman. This is fabulous. We can do this because we're women, and people respond beautifully. And I realized many, many times, one of the risk-oriented things I had to do, I was hired by Steelcase. Those of you from America know what Steelcase is. They invented the filing cabinet. And I was made vice president of the San Francisco branch. And when they hired me, they said, you're going to be the only woman on the board, and you're going to be a director. I said, what's everybody else? A vice president. I said, I'll only take the job if you give me the vice presidency. Otherwise, I decline. I won't take the job. So right away, they looked at each other. They said, okay, you're going to be a vice president. It isn't that I thought I was fabulous, but if everybody else on the board is a vice president, how come the woman has to be a director? So you have to take a risk, but not out of arrogance, but because it's right. But you do it with compassion, and you do it with empathy, because if anybody needs anything in this world, and let me tell you, I give talks and talks and talks and talks to the millennials and the Gen Z group, and what they're looking for is empathy. That's what they want, empathy, because they don't get that from the screen. They don't get that from social media. May I have the next slide, please? And by the way, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, by the way, on the aspect of risk, as the Africans beautifully say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you have to bring everybody with you. And that's what consensus means. And that's what compassion and empathy means. You have to bring everybody with you. And that's the beautiful thing about women. That's why we're always seen as the center of the household, because we pull people together. Presently in the Philippines, we have a woman running for the president. Right now in the Philippines, rather, we have somebody running for the presidency who's a woman. Okay, and we've already had two female presidents. Her name is Lenny Robredo. She has, and I call her a circle of consistent commitment. She has done this from her youth. Ever since she was young, she loved the Filipino people, and she went to the Filipino people. She has a degree, a master's degree in economics, and she has a master's degree in law. Well, she's a lawyer, so it's a master's degree or a doctorate degree. So she has 2. But she didn't just start it here. She started ever since she was young. She wanted to go into economics so she could help the poor Filipino. Look at the way she's walking in slippers. In this country, it's called chinelas. And look at the way she's dressed. She is in this photograph, the vice president of the Philippines. And to show you what they did to her, the president of the Philippines didn't even invite her to the inauguration of his presidency. She was not allowed to go because he didn't like the idea that there was a female vice president. You're not allowed to come. You know what he did to her? He gave her no title. Well, first they gave her a title, and then 3 days later, he took it away. 1 week later, he took it away. He left her without a title, without a staff, no budget, and she has one of the best vice presidencies this country has ever had, ever. She raised her own money. The private sector helped her. And everything that she's done for the last 6 years as vice president, she's done it of her own accord. And that's why a painter did this painting of her. And I think it's perfect. She has the slippers on, he has the dress on, and that she's saluting. And you should see her when she goes and sees the military. There's a whole group in the military who is on her side. So these are the 3 things I want to leave you with. A circle of consensus, get people to go with you. And once it's agreed, everybody has to be there. And when I was made president of Assumption, I was the first lay president. And I had to choose the board that came with me. And anybody who could not do this, who could not deal with a group, and who did not back everybody up, I would ask them to step aside. You have to be strong. That's where you take your risk. That's where the risk comes in. But you do it with compassion and empathy. And number 3, you have to have consistent commitment. And that's the beauty of, she's done this ever since she was in college. And she's done it throughout her life as a senator. First, she was married to somebody in government. He died in a plane crash. Then she became a senator. Then she became vice president, and she's running for the presidency. And I hope to God that she's going to be our next president. So I want to just end it there. Circle of consensus, compassion, and commitment. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Pinky, for sharing your vision with us. It was very inspiring. I'm sure that the participants will have lots of questions and answers for all of our 3 wonderful panelists. Please take this time to put those questions in there now. But I'm going to start with a question or 2 of my own for each of the speakers. I'd like to start with Margot. I wondered if you could share with us your thoughts. I noticed on your last slide that you showed that some countries have quotas for having women on corporate boards. And I wondered what you thought of that idea and whether you think it would work in the countries that you have worked in.
Yes, thank you for that question, Bobby. Yes, some countries do have quotas, and that, as that slide showed, the response is a little bit inconsistent. I was expecting to see overwhelmingly good progress in those countries, and some of them are really making good progress, and some have a ways to go, but we don't know where they started. So they may have made good progress and just had a lot longer to go. I truly believe in the value of diversity, and even if a country or organizations don't have quotas, the investors can take a stance, and not invest in companies that don't have women on boards, so there's opportunities for all of us to make a difference. There's organizations in the US called ISS and Glass Ceilings that put out reports for investors, and their governance organizations. And a lot of times they'll make recommendations to not vote for a nominating chair if they're not putting diversity on the boards. So even though there might not be formal quotas, there are ways that that people and investors can help make those decisions and get people on boards. But hopefully more of these quotas will get us to where we see much more women on boards.
Hopefully soon. Thank you so much. Okay, Anita, I would like to ask you a question. I'm really curious. How did you personally get involved with working with NGOs and at the UN? It sounds like it's been a major part of your career. How did you get involved?
I, as you know, when we were talking about this earlier, and you had invited me to be a speaker, I had also mentioned that Leslie Wright, who is a Zontian, and she was instrumental in me coming to the UN, and she was representing the Girl Guides and Girl Scouts at that point, the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, and invited me to join. And then I haven't looked back since then. It is an incredible, it's simply not about NGOs getting an access badge to the UN. It's about coming together, working together, identifying ways that we can really advocate for the issues, speaking on behalf of people who don't have a voice. And so we have a role as NGO representatives at the UN to really bring those voices to the UN. And so what happens on the ground should come from the ground to the UN and from the UN to those people. And that's the only way change can happen. And once I realized that, I have not stopped since then. And then financing for development came through, which is finance impacts everything. But no matter what we do at the UN, if there is no money, it's not going to happen. So I see the value of advocating through financing for development. So, I'm very passionate about it. I'm very happy that we are able to do it. So, thrilled that I could respond to that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pinky, a very fascinating presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your vision with us. But I wonder, in your own personal career, did you ever experience the glass ceiling, hitting the glass ceiling? And what did you do about it? And what do you advise others to do about it?
Well, when I started, because I used to be a nun, when I left the convent, I worked for Ilo Corporation, which is one of the biggest corporations in the Philippines, one of the biggest anyway. And there were no women on the board at all. I was asked to help the president, like an executive assistant. So I was the only woman there, and there was one woman who was the finance person. Okay, Evelyn Ngo, I'll never forget her. One woman, all men. I was the only woman allowed there because I was the only woman allowed to see everything that the president has on his desk. Okay, so I saw it very, very clearly. Then when I went to the United States, I went back to the United States, and I worked for Steelcase, and I saw the board, all men, all white. They had one African-American, one, okay, no women. Finally, they put one woman. So they had one woman and one. Now, did I hit the glass ceiling? I have been very, very lucky because people have always pushed me forward. The men have. And so, for example, when I was in Ayala, I started there, and then they promoted me and promoted me and promoted me. And it's the men who promoted me. So I didn't personally experience the glass ceiling, but I did realize one thing. You're going to be elevated to a certain level, and then it'll stop. That's as far as that's the glass ceiling, and that's as far as you go. That's why when I went back to the States again, because I was back and forth, and I was hired in Steelcase, and I was made to be a member of the board in San Francisco. That's why I said, everybody here, you're all vice presidents. Yes. Why am I a director? And I just asked for it. And if they said no, I would say, thank you very much. Thank you, with lots of compassion and empathy. Goodbye. And I would have left. But they just looked at each other, and they realized, this is San Francisco. You don't do this. So they gave me the vice presidency. I actually asked for it.
All right. So we just have to ask. We have to take the risk and ask.
You have to take if they say no, no. But you have to be ready to stand up and say, thank you very much, and leave. Mm-hmm. But if they dangle it in front of you and they think you're going to bend and cow, don't bend and don't cow.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Megan now if we have any questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, I have a few more questions for our presenters. Megan, do we have some Q&A questions?
So I actually have a couple of my headquarters team members have been sending me some questions. So I have a few. Anita, can you speak at all to what are some of the challenges or objections that you encounter in terms of countries that either are unwilling or hesitant for ratifying the ILO convention? What are some of the reasons that you hear?
I'm not sure whether I'm privy to share a lot of the specifics, but I can say that, in generally, initially there were resistance because of, there was some perception that this was speaking specifically to certain communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and, but which is something, as you see with certain member states, they are very hesitant to come on board until they have clarification on certain points. And so I think that has been clarified, and that has been one of our roles, is to come to the table and let them know that this encompasses everybody, no matter who it is. And so that is the challenge, is because there's a lack of understanding to a great extent that it is very important to ratify it, because it is better for them. There's a cost involved if you don't ratify them, and it encompasses every single entity regardless of where they come from. And so that clarification was needed, and I think the ILO is working very hard to get that across, and and we are also doing that. So there seems to be a misunderstanding or miscommunication regarding that. So yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. And I think, we've all heard about how COVID-19 has really impacted women who are working, and the additional challenges that it's brought to women as they try to balance work and home life. So can any of you speak to any changes that you think need to happen in the workplace to help address these issues, to help women have the right resources so that it's not an either or choice, but it allows them to flourish in the workplace while still meeting the demands at home?
Could I jump in? I mean, based on all the discussions that we have been hearing, don't you see a shift that's happening within the corporate sector, where there's also, you see a whole shift of people leaving because COVID has sort of made them realize that their priorities are different, and companies have no choice but to make these changes, and people have to demand that. And I think it has come to the forefront, the violence that happened during COVID to a lot of women, because they were in that home setting, and companies have to step up, and so and then enough calls are out there. And so with the ratification of ILO 190, what happens is the governments will demand in sort of private sector entities, regardless of what sector it is, to put in place certain provisions to protect the rights of women, which makes it easier for them to be in this environment, right? More facilitate their participation in the workspace. Yes, and that's my answer to that.
Thanks, Anita. I think it's important that you highlighted also what's happening to women at home is also needs to be addressed. So that's great. Bobby, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Bobby, you're on mute. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. We have just a couple of minutes left, but I have another question for Margot. You shared some tips with us on how we might go about trying to get on a corporate board, but do you have any tips on how to maximize our effectiveness once we get there?
Sure. And I've been able to do this a little bit since I was the first woman on this board, and we brought a couple more on, and I've kind of wore the mentoring hat. And one is, it's kind of the one we've all been talking about, but always make sure you're leaning in and asking those questions and being engaged in the board meetings. We do, as a board, we're wearing a governance hat. So we don't want to dig into all the operational aspects of the organization, but we certainly can provide great insight. And I have found that by bringing some women from some different backgrounds, they're bringing really great diverse perspectives. And so when they do speak, people are listening. So I'm encouraging them to speak up when they have things to share. And they've been doing that. The other nice thing is the board that we're on, we have really good engagement with the leadership team at the organization. And those one-on-one dialogues with the women that are coming up in the organization, I think are really helpful in the future leaders of the company. And that's where we also can make a difference in being effective board leaders.
You know, I'd like to add something to what she's saying. As
Yes,
I told you,
Maggie.
I was on a team, they were all men. And as she was saying, ask the questions. Because if you come in and you have all of these opinions to start with, if you start with the question and it complements the person who just spoke, and they gave it, oh, I like her, I like that opinion, it's great. Where did you get that from? Blah, 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 blah. How do you see it implemented? How does that coordinate with this? How does, because I was working in a manufacturing plant, we were making furniture. So how does this coordinate with our marketing department? When you ask the question, first of all, the men feel like their ego just swells because you ask them a question and they get to show off. I hate to be very, I'm telling you, I'm taking a different perspective. And so they feel great. And you know what? Then they like you because you make them feel good. Then when you have your opinion, guess what? They're listening to you. Just a little tip that I learned.
And if I could play off of that, you know, it go along with what Megan was asking, because we are working from home so much now and we're doing things virtually. And I coach the other women on the board, keep your camera on, make eye contact with the people that are presenting, because oftentimes people want to shut their camera off when other people are speaking. And so that, you know, it seems like a simple thing to do, but it keeps you engaged with folks when you're doing that.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for your input. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time limit. I appreciate the questions that we've had today, but if you have additional questions, please email them to programs@zonta.org. And also be aware that this whole session today has been recorded and will be posted on the Zonta International website, so that you can all share it with others and with your Zonta clubs, and maybe get some interest in doing something about women in the workplace, and sharing the news about the Ilo Convention and how to get women on corporate boards, and a vision for the future where men and women work together more cooperatively with consistent compassion, the 3 C's that Pinky shared with us. So anyway, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.